Well, we're living in interesting times. I can't give you any reassurances that this will go well. I can only say there might be somebody who wakes up. And I think the Europeans will wake up the moment they find out that their money is stolen for false security, and they won't get the welfare and the pensions and the decent prices that we used to have, and their children will not grow up in good schools.
Du lyssnar på Zeitgeist Sweden med mig, Thabo Motsieloa. En podcast om samtiden, samhället och livet. Nya avsnitt varje vecka där poddar finns. Stötta gärna podden genom att följa, dela eller lämna ett betyg på Spotify, Apple Podcast eller där du lyssnar. Det betyder mycket. Nu kör vi! With no more Soviet and the death of Russian communism, what's the really need for NATO to carry on? Well, they did. And now that it has faced its first peer rival on the battlefield, it doesn't stand united. What went wrong? And where are we headed? Here are some opinions and views from one of Sweden's internationally most experienced scholars when it comes to war, conflict, and peace resolution. Please note that the interview you're about to watch was recorded mid-December 2025, before the ousting of the Venezuelan President Maduro.
Our guest of the day has spent over 20 years teaching peace and conflict studies as a visiting professor at universities in Japan, Spain, Austria, Burundi, and Switzerland. He brings hands-on experience in international affairs, especially in conflict analysis, peace building, mediation, and reconciliation. And his work has taken him to places like Somalia, Burundi, Georgia, Iraq, and the former Yugoslavia. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Jan Øberg.
Thank you so much.
We're going to have
I'm glad you only mentioned a few of the things I'm guilty of.
Yeah, but please add on so we get the full picture.
Yes. No, it's fine. Let's go on.
Yeah. We're very happy to have you here. I've seen a lot of shows where they've had you as guest in these dire times where things are shifting rapidly. So my idea of this conversation is to get a grip of what has been happening, the backdrop to the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine and the invasion, and also the future and how we can reach peace, if we can reach peace, and the implications of the result of the war, of which we don't know yet. So if you could please give us a backdrop to why the war started. What was the setup and why did Russia invade Ukraine?
Okay, thank you very much. Most people focus on the war, and they think that this, therefore, is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It is not. If you look at the conflict, it's between NATO and Russia. Now, it goes 30 years plus back. It goes back to the promises given to the last Soviet leader, Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, who all important Western leaders promised not to expand NATO 1 inch if he accepted that Germany, which was two at that time, East and West Germany, were united and were united in NATO. He said yes to that. And so they got what they wanted, and then they cheated him. Because we have now, I think, Ukraine is the 11th country that has been included, or they tried to include into NATO. So that's the first thing. That is something that every president in Russia since then has been protesting. Putin did it at the Munich Security Conference in 2007 and said, what happened to your promises to Gorbachev? And so that's the first part. The other part is the coup d'etat, the regime change that the Obama administration. Nobody is talking about Obama. He was the creator of this problem. By conducting a regime change in 2014 in Kiev, getting rid of a pro-Russian president and getting in a pro-Western leadership with Poroshenko, the president, the chocolate king, as he was called, because he was a wealthy man from having produced chocolate. And Yashenuk and others that the US simply installed. And the legitimate elected president had to flee to Russia. Now, after that came in CIA all over the place. After that came in biological laboratories. After that came in the idea of building up the Ukrainian army. Poroshenko has later on said that it was like having a child for him and seeing it grow. And then they started killing Russians, together with making Russians second-class citizens in Ukraine, the language question, etc. And then, of course, popping up the neo-Nazi elements. I'm not saying it's a Nazi regime, but it has certainly very strong elements of it, including the Azov battalion and things like that. So at some point, after Putin had given several warnings and also presented ideas about how they would have to stop expanding NATO and wanted negotiations, which then Secretary General Stoltenberg has been sitting very clearly and said he proposed this and that, and of course we said no. And so this hubris, this arrogance, this lack of political wisdom and statesmanship, that is the huge blunder of the West and NATO. And it will fall because of that. NATO will not survive its blunder, in my view. It's just a matter of time. And it shouldn't. Because, NATO today is a criminal organization. And I say that, and I want to specify what I mean. By the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, it broke its own treaty. The treaty is a copy of the United Nations Charter. It says that all conflicts shall be transferred to the United Nations. And its only role is within the membership circle that if a member is attacked, the others will come and help it. I could sign that as a peace research. It's an excellent idea. It's a defensive treaty. The only problem is NATO is all over the place and has been bombing and doing things it has no treaty right to do. In that sense, it's a criminal organization. And it has been ever since the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, which I happened to witness, which I happened to work against, which I happened to be under the bombs in Belgrade when they fell. So long story short, this is NATO's expansion on behalf of Russian, or to the detriment of Russia's legitimate security interest. Now, let me be very clear. I wrote an article the day after the invasion and distanced myself from it because, in my view, it's a violation of international law. I can explain it, but it doesn't mean that I endorse it. But what has happened is that NATO has been the prime conflict actor in creating that war. And let me then finish by saying it's the most cynical and disgusting war I've seen in my life, because NATO and Russia are willing to see the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian people as the victims of their conflict. You see what I mean? If NATO wants to make Russia weak or defeat Russia militarily, put in the hundreds of thousands of NATO soldiers, NATO countries' soldiers. Fight Russians, pay the price for it. But the cowardly policy of letting the Ukrainian innocent, non-armed, I'm not talking about those who fight, I'm talking about the civilian citizens of Ukraine, millions of people whose lives will be destroyed in the future. That is a cowardly war. Russia is paying a price with its soldiers, but the parties are kind of agreeing on having to fight out their conflict in making a war on a third party's territory. And finally there, I have no respect for Mr. Zelensky because, one, he's not a legitimate president for long ago, but he has been willing to play the role that has destroyed his country and will destroy it for decades ahead. He should have said no to be the puppet of the West in this. But he was selected, of course, as an actor. He was selected as a man who could be who could be persuaded, who could be a puppet on a string for that NATO expansion. Now, it's not going to work. Ukraine will never be a NATO country. And any idiot could see that 30 years ago. Kissinger said it. The last U.S. ambassador to Moscow said it. Burns, who was an ambassador in Moscow, later on became the head of CIA, had said that Ukraine was the reddest of all red lines. Don't do it. I said it 10, 15 years ago. For Christ's sake, don't do Ukraine. You may do Montenegro or something like that, but don't do Ukraine. It's impossible without war. And nobody listened because Russia was on its knees. Russia, in the sense of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, had fallen apart. Tell you what, NATO should have been closed down when the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union disappeared. That's what we argued in our foundation at that time, and that's what I personally have been saying all the time. There's no legitimate reason for NATO because its reasons for being there, although it was created first and not the second, the reason of NATO's existence was the existence of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. There was no need to have NATO after 89-90. But they saw, of course, now we can have a unipolar world. We can do what we want. We can cheat anyone. We can lie. We can drop our promises. No, you can't. Not even in international politics. You can't. There is now a price to be paid for the West.
And what was the incentives for the West, the collective West, to push Russia to this, to make the conclusion that they have to invade? What was the gains that could have been made?
Well, I think the gain was to get as many countries as possible into NATO. We often talk about Ukraine getting into NATO. We should talk about NATO getting into Ukraine. Sorry?
Was it self-serving to incorporate Ukraine, or was there another incentive or objective that was lying ahead?
Well, you might say the reason NATO has existed the last 30 years is that it has expanded because it's original. I mean, see expansion as a raison d'être, because the original purpose of having NATO is gone long ago. It's an irrelevant organization built on a philosophy which has always been outdated and can never, by definition, create peace and stability and security for anyone. The NATO's, let's say, philosophy. The basic of it is offensive deterrence, and by offensive deterrence, we can have a long discussion about that. The offensive deterrence, you cannot make peace, because offensive deterrence means that if you live 7,000 kilometers away, I have long-range weapons by which I can kill you if you don't do what I think you should do, or if you do something I don't like you to do. Now, those who are 7,000 kilometers away happen to then think, if they can hit me this far away, or even closer, I'm threatened. So I better get such weapons too. That's why we've had an arms race all the time and not a disarmament race. Whereas if every country thought, which is according to the UN Charter, everybody thought in self-defense as being strong. If somebody comes to you or tries to harm in other ways your society, then you are strong. The Gandhian philosophy, if you will. Don't threaten anyone, but give them hell if they come to you or try to harm you. That's defensive. That's a defensiveness. We should have defensive weapons, not offensive long-range weapons, etc. The whole philosophy of the world, national defense being offensive deterrence, is wrong. And of course, the wrongest of them all is nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons have nothing to do with peace. It's bullshit. It's people who have never been thinking. And so we have a huge task when we're creating a new world after the US empire and NATO is gone. And that is, how do we shape, as long as we are nation states and regions, how do we shape a security and peace and defense policy that leads to disarmament of the huge, people are not aware of how big it is. If I tell you the military expenditures of the world's UN members is 100 times bigger than everything the United Nations does, including its administration. If I tell you that, who would believe that the United Nations could be strong and stop wars and do things when the member states invest 100 times more in arms than it does in making the world a good place through the United Nations.
A lot of people would claim that the nuclear threat was what kept us in check and stopped the wars from blowing up in Europe since World War II. Do you agree with that, or do you have a different take on it?
No, I mean, if humanity has lived for I don't know how many thousand years, don't tell me that we cannot get rid of them again because they were introduced in July 45. This is nonsense. Secondly, that philosophy that you just mentioned is something you hear again and again. They are there to never be used. Now, you see, we're back to defensive philosophy and offensiveness and deterrence, which nobody has studied. These guys don't study anymore. They just say these words with the uniform on and they don't know what they're talking about. If you have deterrence, that means you deter. You have some means by which you can prevent people from doing what you don't like them to do. Now, if A and B both have nuclear weapons, and A knows about B, that B will never, ever, under any circumstance, will never use nuclear weapons. Then there's no deterrence. Every nuclear weapon in the world is there to be used if deterrence fails. Because if I know about you, and you're a nuclear power, if I know about you, that you would never use the nuclear weapons you have, I'm not deterred from killing you, or harming you, or invading you. There must always be, for every of these weapons, according to NATO's philosophy and first use and all these things, there is always the risk that they will be used, because if they are not used, and if we know about the other party that he will not, never, ever use them under any circumstance, then it's not a deterrence anymore, and then the nuclear weapon might happen. So this idea that we have some nuclear weapons that they will never use is a nice theory until it is proven wrong. And there's much more a way to legitimize nuclear weapons than it is to think thoroughly about things. But we have no philosophical discussion, no theoretical conceptual discussion. We just hear idiots all over the world, the militarists, East, West, North, and South, say we need more weapons for deterrence. And, you know, the mantra of NATO has been security, stability, and peace. No matter what the hell you do, we do it for security, stability, and peace. Now, where are we? With an alliance that has lasted since 49, promising us peace. Where are we now? We're on the brink of war. Why don't people see that this whole way of thinking is wrong? And it costs humanity in tremendous resources for no good reason. I'm sorry, but I'm a peace researcher.
Yeah. There was a window of opportunity in April 2022 with the Istanbul peace treaty that never was written. Yes. And it was like a lost opportunity. Was there a real and serious possibility that peace could have been reached at that moment?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You had the Minsk agreement, you had the negotiations in Turkey, and one of those who came in and destroyed the whole thing was Boris Johnson. It's well known. I mean, I'm not inventing things. You don't have to invent. The madness is clearly well documented. He came in and said, don't sign anything with the Russians. We have better ideas. Of course, he didn't have any ideas. He's an immoral man with no intellect. But the long story short is, of course, this could have stopped long ago. This war should never have happened. Like many other wars, like the bombing of Yugoslavia. I mean, just to give you an example, I was a mediator for 4 years between Kosovo's leadership and the 3 governments in Belgrade. I know that this conflict could have been solved without bombings. But these guys want bombing. And why do they want bombing? Because they belong to what I call MIMAC, the military, industrial, media, academic complex. These are small elites in all countries who earn money from it, who get power from it, who talk with each other, and they couldn't care less about the security of their citizens. It's not about security, stability, and peace. It has never been. And so that's one of civilization's biggest lies, and they're propagated all the time by media who sell this bullshit instead of asking, hey, how come you're asking for more weapons when more weapons have not led to more peace? There's no correlation between weapons investments and peace. That's not true. Simply not true. Read your books.
For you,
and by the
now,
way,
yeah,
if you're a civilized nation, a civilized person, it is criminal to argue that we should use violence and warfare when there are other alternatives available. If you are really, really part of an asymmetric conflict where you have an underdog who is pounded again and again by the top dog, I can understand that somebody says they have a right to use weapons against. But you're talking about NATO, where diplomacy has disappeared, where peace thinking has disappeared, where peace institutes have disappeared, where peace education has disappeared. Everything that could be an alternative to the use of military has been disappeared by the West, and everything has gone to the military. That is extremely immoral, because when there are alternatives of a civilian kind, then they should be used first, and weapons and violence should always be the last resort, exactly like in medicine. You don't start out operating on a patient before you know what the diagnosis and prognosis is. But here you take out the knife and begin to cut and shoot and kill. And the patient, of course, is killed. The patient is called peace. There's no peace left anywhere.
The route that Sweden took, we entered NATO without a referendum.
Like everywhere else.
Like everywhere else. In hindsight, what are the consequences of this move from your perspective?
It is a gross reduction of the security and peace, but let's say security of the Swedish people. But they have been sold this, again, sorry for my language, bullshit, by the Russians are coming. I mean, you have had Øberg, the chief of defense, seriously saying that we have to plan for an isolated attack on Gotland. And he said also, and I live here in Skåne, in Lund, he said that we cannot exclude a Russian invasion of an occupation of southern Sweden. Excuse me, if you have people in the top leadership, he was a top flight guy, for your international leaders, the highest military person in Sweden. It's time to resign or be thrown out by a decent government. If you say this type of nonsense, and there is no way in which any media has ever asked him or the present one, what do you build your threat image on? What is your analysis? What has happened before Putin can land in southern Sweden, Trelleborg or Ystad, and occupy the southern part of Sweden? Would you please tell us, how did he do that? What happened before? What would his motive be? Does he have the capacity to do so militarily, politically, psychologically, structurally? I mean, look at this country, poor Ukraine. How much have they been able to do there since they started the invasion? And now we have this barrage of false, it's total fake and false images that Russia is afterwards going to take all of Ukraine and then the Baltic republics and then a couple of NATO countries and then Sweden and Finland and Norway and Denmark. Excuse me, this is fantasy. This is paranoia. This is a psychological disease, because there's not one analysis you can give us and give the people who pay for all this. There's not one analysis ever given how these threat analyses, what they are built on.
The basis of it. But do the leaders themselves believe this, or are they just selling this talking point?
That's a very good question. I grappled with it because earlier, 20, 30 years ago, I had contact with a lot of then politicians in Denmark and Sweden. I'm a Danish citizen. I sat in the Danish Commission for Security and Disarmament. I knew everybody, including the Prime Minister and the Minister of Disarmament, etc. I was a consultant in the 80s for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Stockholm. I knew Palme. And at that time, politicians did what they seriously believed in, basically. Today, I'm not in contact with politicians to ask them, but whether they really believe what they say. My hunch is that they are playing games. They know that the game is lost, and how do you hide that? By pounding your breast and say, we're strong, we're going to do this and that. Now, if we have had 19 packages of sanctions against Russia, the 20s will do the trick, but the 19 first didn't do the trick. You know, I guess Madame von der Leyen probably believes what she says. And I would see that needs a psychologist. Honestly speaking, if you have those images without checking reality, if you live in your own bubble, if you live with what the American social psychologist Irving Janis calls groupthink, you're in a very dangerous position. Groupthink means you have a little group of people who have over time come to the same conclusions about what the world looks like. And every information coming from the outside into their black box where they're sitting, or their echo chamber, is repelled. No, this is not true. This is conspiracy theory, or no, this is not realistic, or something like that. They finally come to the conclusion in that little group. It may be a government leadership, it may be a NATO's leadership, or the US, that we cannot be wrong. And then you make a decision that turns out to be a disaster. Groupthink is it sounds like a not so dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous thing. And I think these politicians down through Europe, when they now say that we need to continue arming Ukraine to win over Russia while the United States has left that game, and they cannot even see that they are alone with that perverse view, and it hasn't worked since the invasion. You know, I ask myself, which world do they live in?
But since the Americans started the conflict, as when we entered this conversation, you said that they were meddling with Ukrainian politics. But now it seems like the European community are the ones that wants to prolong the conflict. Why do we have this division where the United States says, okay, we're pulling out of this conflict, and Europe still wants to stay in the fight? Could you give me some kind of viewpoint of how come they divided themselves?
I think that they are the victims now of their own perverse worldview, in which they say Russia is going to swallow all of Europe and we have to stand up even if the Americans don't. That analysis is wrong. Now you see, everybody says Chechnya. You may say that's a point. Everybody says Georgia. Russia did Georgia. It did not do Georgia. It's a lie. It was Saakashvili and Georgia that started killing Russian soldiers in South Ossetia. And then comes, they took Crimea and they took this and that. Look at what the Americans and NATO countries have taken and done. Who can blame anybody for what happened in Ukraine or Crimea if you look at what happened in Kosovo? I mean, it is this black and white image again, which is a sickness of the Western world. You're either totally good or totally bad. There's nothing in between. Another thing they use psychologically, and that's why I mean it seriously, they need psychologists to help them, or psychiatrists, is the psychopolitical projection. Everything we blame Russia for is something we have done 10 times worse ourselves. But we load off our own dark sides on somebody else. And now China is a big threat to the world, right? The Western civilization, if we can still call it that, cannot live without images of enemies. The Chinese do not see, I know that from conversations with Chinese, they do not see the West or anybody else as enemies at the outset. They may say, we have found out that they are, and they have much better reasons to see the West as problematic because we all colonized them for periods. The Japan, Second World War cost 20 million Chinese their lives. They have all reasons to be very skeptical about the West. I mean, excuse me, where has modern China invaded any Western country, or for that matter, any country apart from 70s? There was a thing with Vietnam. The rest of it is defensiveness, except for the nuclear weapons and long-range weapons. But it's for political philosophy is peaceful coexistence. It's built into the constitution. The old agreement between Chu Enlai and Nero living peacefully together according to 5 principles. We don't have such principles in the West. We only have first strike with nuclear weapons, offensive deterrence, more to the armament, and no diplomacy anymore. There is no diplomacy anymore. I have not, for the 50 years I've been in this, and I was alive and active during the First Cold War, there was diplomacy. There was the OSCE. There was a constant contact. There were surveying of being present at each other's military exercises. There was everything to avoid war. And now these guys are doing the opposite. I call them kakistocrats. Kakistocracy.
What does that mean?
I'll tell you, it's very simple. It's a political term built on a Greek word. It's the opposite of aristocracy. Kakistocracy is government by the least able and least good people. That's where we are today. It's not a democracy, it's a kakistocracy. That's what we live in today. We live with people who are leaders who have not read books and who are not able to write books. We have people who, if you ask the Minister of Defense what offensive deterrence is, he would not be able to speak for 30 seconds about the concept he uses.
Is peace obtainable in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia?
Yes.
And by what means can we reach a peace that is sustainable?
By anything else but Trump's peace plan. The whole world is now calling Trump a peacemaker. His plan is called a peace plan. Yeah, I tell you one thing, that's because the world is totally peace and conflict illiterate. There's no education in the area, and everybody who says, I have a peace plan, is considered having a peace plan. Nobody's asking, is that really a way to do peace? And is what he suggests, will that lead to peace? I've not seen that analysis except coming out from peace researchers.
What are the faults in the 28 points?
Let me start out by just one of the biggest and self-evident for anybody who knows anything about peace. The major or any participant, the major or any participant in a conflict cannot also be a mediator. It's as simple as that. And the whole thing, whatever 28 points is about weapons, it's about guarantees, it's about territory, it's about physical things. In the present, there's no vision of how these people are going to live together peacefully in the future and not having the conflict come back. This is the lousiest, most primitive, totally unbelievably stupid way of making peace, and it will not work. I tell you, that plan will not make peace in Ukraine, Russia, and Western Europe together.
But that's one of the sides. Does one of the sides need to be admitting defeat in order to reach a peace, or can a peace be obtained without any of the sides admitting defeat?
Yes, of course. What you need when you make peace is a vision of a future that is better than continuing the war. It's simple as that. How do you move people from believing that they can win a war over to believing we will all benefit if we begin to cooperate instead? So we have produced here in this little foundation, and of course nobody's taking up anywhere in the media, is a portfolio of ideas about peacemaking that can be discussed freely around the world, also by the parties. By the way, you don't make a plan. The word plan is already indicative of you not knowing anything about peace, because who is Trump to come and say, I have a plan for how millions of people shall live in the future, but they're not at the table? That's what we in the profession calls conflict theft, or snatching the conflict from the people who have it, who are in it, who pay the price for it. When you are a conflict participant, you are the only ones who can say yes to another future. But a mediator comes in, is neutral, and asks all the parties, what are you afraid of? What do you want in the future? What would your ideal future be? And 3, what can you live with? And you ask this, you have a dialogue with all the parties, and you begin to find that in the middle there's something overlapping that perhaps all the parties will not be very happy about, but they could They could benefit more from that than continuing the war. That's when you begin to itch a future of 10 or 15, 20 years ahead for the Ukrainian people, their relationship with the Russian people or Russia and with the West. You cannot make peace unless you have the creativity to discuss possible future arrangements, and as a jigsaw puzzle, finally you have a picture of what they could live with. That's peacemaking. It takes years. And therefore, in between, you need United Nations peacekeepers, the classical thing that they worked in Yugoslavia, could work in Donbass. Secondly, just such a banal thing, why quarrel about territory? The parties could use the territory together and make an economic growth zone like, let's say, Shenzhen in China or the Belt and Road Initiative. Donbass is full of resources. Make that a cooperation between Russia and China with a win-win for both, and make it a transport corridor to the West. You can do things all the time, just with a little creativity.
Mm-hmm. But that would leave Ukraine out of the picture. So why should Ukraine cede that territory?
No. Why do you think it would leave Ukraine out of the picture? They would participate in all these dialogues about the future. I would say, if you want to discuss Ukraine's future,
should it be a tripart? Cooperation with Ukraine, Russia, China, for instance?
You could be, and of course with Europe. But what I'm saying is there are lots of resources that the parties could benefit from using together, instead of fighting about me sitting on all of it. Then you may say, oh, but that accepts Russia has invaded and taken some territory. Yes, but I'm sorry, that's history. You will not get those territories 100% back to Ukraine, but get the best out of the situation and see, can we do something together and become friends? If people cooperate, they usually become friends. Of course, there's a conflict potential also in cooperation. But if you get mutually dependent on benefits, but also on getting things done, then you are less likely. That's a philosophy of the Belt and Road Initiative. You are less likely to start a war because you're mutually dependent. But it's not exploitative. It's not colonialism. I'm talking about win-win. The idea that we both, Ukraine and Russia, gain something from using the territory for constructive purpose and for Europe and themselves. That's what I'm saying. And I would like the United Nations headquarters to move to Kiev. There's no reason to have the United Nations in New York anymore, because the U.S. is violating its host agreement against all, international law. And you could also see it if you make Ukraine something like a new Eastern Switzerland. Anybody would be able to see that that is better than putting it into NATO, which is falling apart already. I mean, there's so many things. You cannot paint peace if you cannot have a vision. That's what I mean.
Okay, we had some technical mishap, so we had to change camera, Jan. But as a mediator in this conflict, with the vision that you portray, who could take that role? Is it China, or do you see any other participants? Should it be a coalition?
Of countries, I would say China definitely, because China has done the wise thing of giving framework conditions. They have never produced a plan for peace. They respect people who have a conflict to be the ones who can finally produce a plan, not something you tell them, this is my plan and you should follow it. I mean, this is typical difference between East and West, Chinese and Western thinking. The other thing, of course, is the United Nations. The third thing would be a group of trained, intelligent, experienced diplomats forming a group for this. And you have lots of civil society organizations, peace organizations, others who could, if not at government level, they could help the people to meet and discuss. You know, you cannot make peace without involving the citizens of the country that is involved. You can say that. I mean, I'm sick and tired of seeing Putin, Zelensky, and Trump discussing what peace is. I mean, where are the millions of people who will have to live with their peace ideas? I'm sorry, this has nothing to do with democracy.
How do you go about it to involve the population in this debate and this vision? Do you have to have a referendum in Russia, a referendum in Ukraine? in order to get
I wouldn't start with a referendum. I would use, there are organizations for nonviolence in Ukraine. There are people who know about conflict resolution in Ukraine. There are experts in Russia. There are experts in Europe. There are experts in the United States who know what peace and peacemaking is. They're not used. They're not listened to. Please be aware, there's not a single government leader in the world who has a peace advisor. There's no peace academies. You know what happened to the U.S. Peace Academy? It is now Donald Trump's Peace Institute, right? Peace is totally gone. I'm sorry, but we have a reservoir of an academic discipline as important, completely like economy or law, that is not used because these guys think that the only solution is weapons. And that is militarism, and intellectual disarmament is the precondition for military armament. We are kakistocracy whose only tool in the toolbox is hammers.
So if I get you wrong, you say we can reach a peace that is a lasting agreement, but right now it seems that we are far from it. Will we reach it with the structures that we have today, or do you think that they have to implode before we can build up something new? When I say implode, that is that we get a new movement in Europe and change of governments, or can we, within the same frame that we have today, reach this vision that you envision?
Well, point one, everything will be much more easy and straightforward when the US empire and NATO has disappeared. Now, I don't know how long time that will take, but it will not take a long time. Trump is a very good destroyer. And I don't like that because I've never been anti-American. I'm anti-militarism, interventionism, and these things, but I'm not anti-American. I've never been. But the American empire is going down, and it will fall. And my big question is, will it be implosion or explosion? Will it be the big war because they say we go down with a bang, not with a whimper? Or will somebody come to their senses, including European leaders, and say we cannot just say weapons every time we see a problem? I would like to believe the latter because we have intelligence, we have civilization, we have education, we have research. But I cannot sit here and promise you that it'll go that way. I don't know. It's possible. Peace is totally possible. It's nonsense that we cannot have peace with the Russians or Russians cannot have peace with us. It's nonsense. Of course we can. We don't, seriously speaking, have a choice because we're neighbors. And I'm not saying loving each other. I'm saying respectful, trustful, security-based, common security, as the Olof Palme Commission said, defensive defense. Of course we can have peace. The question is, do we want it? And people in Europe would say, yes, we want peace, but they're taking all the wrong steps and tools that they will never reach peace. And that, to me, is very much an educational problem, but it's also a moral problem. I cannot answer your question better.
But it seems to be a perspective that we have that if anybody else is strong, it makes us weak, and we can't cooperate on an equal level of strength with respect to the other sides, the adversaries' safety issues and also prosperity. Is this a mind shift, a frame of mind that is universal, or is it specific for the Western world?
I think much is specific for the Western world. Much of it, for instance, that everybody is principally an enemy, and black and white images, they are good, we are bad, we are good, they are bad. Mission, the idea of mission, they must be like us, are all, curses of the Western civilization. It is not the way it really is, but that's how we see the world. You see immigrants or refugees, you see them as a problem, not as a benefit, basically. There might be exceptions, but basically, all these people throw them out, although they are coming in because of our wars. But long story short, I think we are in a situation in which, we're living in interesting times. I can't give you any reassurances that this will go well. I can only say there might be somebody who wakes up. And I think the Europeans will wake up the moment they find out that their money is stolen for false security, and they won't get the welfare and the pensions and the decent prices that we used to have, and their children will not grow up in good schools. You know, at some point, people will make the connection between militarism and 5% of the gross national product and other terrible waste, which is the government's way of exploiting and fooling their citizens, promising them peace and never getting to peace. And that may at some point start riots all over. Good-hearted people who will say, enough is enough. Why are we spending money on this but not on our schools and our hospitals and our infrastructure? Why can the Chinese do things so much better than we can? You know, that might happen at some point. And then things will change in the West.
As you put it, and as many put it, the war can't be won by the Ukrainian side, with the perspective of territorial gains. The Russian won't cede the territory that they have taken already. But beyond the war, sooner or later, we will have some kind of peace. Are we moving to a multipolarity or multinodality? And which one of those would you prefer? Or do you have a third alternative?
Well, I'm sure that there will be no new empire. It will not be a unipolar world. The Chinese are not wanting that. That's not in their genes. Secondly, there will be multipolar. The problem I have with the word pole is like it's something that is stuck in the ground, like a Greek temple, you know, or something like that. I think we will have a much more networking world where, in the best of cases, we have to network. That's maybe because I hope we will. The reason I hope we will have a multi-networking world, because without networking and working together about the real problems of the world, which is not war, but the real problem is the environment and poverty and welfare and, you know, all these things. And we don't have enough time if we don't soon concentrate on that. I would like to see it as a much more, you know, changing coalitions. And I would like to see something much more seriously done about global governance. You know, today you have a globalized economy, you have a globalized culture, you have a globalized military, or globalizing. But you don't have a globalized politics. You and I can only vote for our national governments. This is totally outdated. One, national governments decide less and less of our future because the future is decided outside by international organizations. And secondly, we need to be allowed to and change democracy to be that we can vote for who represents us in international forums. I'd like to vote for the guy who is representing Sweden or Denmark in NATO or the United Nations. I mean, we have a national democracy, which, by the way, don't work anymore. People don't trust anything politicians say anymore for good reasons. But also, we are limited to just deciding the future, or helping decide our future for our country, but not for the world. Humanity needs to have some kind of new way of thinking of this, how to make decisions globally in a networking, multipolar world. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's time we have much more direct democracy, because what we have today, for instance, in Sweden, is we can vote for somebody who has been elected to be on a list by others. We cannot vote for somebody who's just a good person. So there's no democracy in that sense, because less than 1 to 2% of the people who are politically active in parties have decided who shall be on the list, and then you and I can go and say this person, when on election day. This is not democracy in my view. It needs something else. You know, I used to jokingly say, if we can decide which is the best song in Europe, in the European Song Contest, you know, Eurovision Song Contest, why can't we also decide who are the good politicians whom we want to lead the European Union or NATO or something like that? You know, I'm trying to drop some ideas. Why the hell do we accept that national democracy should be enough in a world that is globalizing? And the final thing is, of course, huge UN reform. For Christ's sake, don't throw the United Nations out. I see so many people say, oh, it's useless organization, close it down. They don't know what they talk about. Because yes, the United Nations is underfinanced, misused, and totally ignored in a number of circumstances. Secondly, it needs reform. The Security Council is an outdated thing from 45, right? I understand that, but don't throw it out because the charter, the normativity put into the charter is the most important and most Gandhian document governments have ever signed. Build on the good things the UN has and change it for the better and to humanity. But don't throw it out, which a lot of people think they can do. You know, if you throw out the United Nations, we are doomed. I'm sorry, that we're doomed because then there's no international law, there's no charter, there's no normativity anymore. That is hellishly dangerous of these people who have never been thinking of the fact that Trygve, the first Secretary General, said very clearly, the UN will never be stronger or better than the member states want to make it. Before you criticize the UN as UN, criticize your own country's way of being a UN member. Every country is violating the UN Charter every day. Why do I say that? Finally, Article 1 says that peace shall be established by peaceful means. Who the hell is doing that apart from Costa Rica and Iceland, who don't have weapons or military or army? The rest is violating the UN Charter every day. And I think we should be aware of that and support the UN and give them a chance to survive in a reformed shape.
We have been living a very comfortable life for the last decade up in this part of the world, in Scandinavia. In Swedish, we say fredsskadad. You're a little bit, how do you put it in English?
Sorry, in Swedish we say what?
Fredsskadad.
Yeah.
When you come into a comfort zone, when you had a long sustained peace and you don't really...
we'll be war damaged.
Yeah.
But for the simple reason that
but
nature-based...
do you have to crash before we can rebuild? Or can we rebuild without crashing? First.
I think we can rebuild without crashing. But I also think that the probability that we cannot is rising. It's increasing. Because I don't see the new type of leadership we need in Europe or in NATO or the US in the West to save ourselves. It seems like we are getting more and more frustrated, more and more emotionalist, more and more self-righteous, instead of saying, let's stop and think. Where are we heading? What will be the consequences on a 5 or 10 years horizon of what we do today? There's no intellectualism anymore and absolutely no ethics. People are lying to you. Politicians are lying to you. Media are lying to you. I could list a lot of reasons why things will have to go to hell before they get better. But I'm kind of an optimistic person. I believe in peace. I believe in common sense. I believe that humanity is able to save itself before it's too late. And that's what I'm working for with my colleagues in the Transnational Foundation. We produce ideas of how it could be better. And that is one thing most commentators, researchers, and other good-hearted people forget. Be like a doctor. It's not enough to have geopolitical diagnosis and geopolitical military prognosis and predict that war is around the corner. What we all need are good doctors who say this can be done to save. This can be done to save your health, your society. This can be done to help save the world. Now that's where social scientists, where commentators, where the media, where the politicians are failing grossly and miserably. There's no future discussion. There's no good visions. There are no good ideas. And if you come with good ideas, or at least some ideas that ought to be discussed, people will say, oh, that's not realistic. Now, when did you last hear a media asking a prime minister who wants more weaponry, is that realistic way to create peace? They don't. The media are so guilty for what the mainstream media are so guilty for what happens now, and also for making people lose hope. Because everything you see in the media every day is bad news, and that's a crime in itself. It's psychologically terms, it's a crime because people rather watch the entertainment or take another glass of wine than engage in society with those types of things you see on primetime news every night and listen to on the radio every day. There are so many good things happening in the world and you're not told about it. Not the least in China, but in China it has to be that China is bad. There's only one story about China. It is that it is bad. Those of us who have been there for 40 years in and out of China, we know that that is a lie too.
Do you have a few in bullet points, things that you think that we could learn from the Chinese example and make use of?
Harmony is a good thing. Don't force others to lose face. Think long term. Have a vision for your society. And work together. And never do exploitation, but win-win. The whole Western world is about colonialism, imperialism, militarism, which is win-lose. We could change anytime tomorrow if we wanted to. We are intellectually able to do that. And I would add, whether it's Chinese or not, I would say use the arts, use culture. The most creative people are probably artists. I'm not saying that because I'm an art photographer, but I'm also an art photographer, not only. But I'm saying it because whenever a painter wants to paint a painting, he or she has an idea what the painting will be. Whereas in politics, there is no creativity, there's no vision. People are making decisions out of the blue, under pressure, emotionalist, hateful, or whatever. But they have no vision, neither what society or situation they want to get to, but also not whether what we do now will have bad or good consequences for ourselves. In my view, the Western today is not destroying the rest of the world, it's destroying itself. It's destroying itself by reducing freedom of speech. Freedom of the free media doesn't exist anymore in the mainstream sector. It's destroying itself by militarism instead of economic innovations and welfare. It's destroying itself by isolating itself vis-a-vis the rest of the world. We are totally into self-destruction in the naive belief that we can destroy Russia or China or Iran or India. We cannot. I'm sorry, we're destroying ourselves on the way. And that is tragic beyond words. But I again think we have to keep the dialogue going. And we have to hope that at some point humanity will rise against these leaders who play the games, the bad games they have constructed, and to cover up their blunders, such as NATO's expansion that we started talking about with. So I usually end all conversations like this in my lectures with saying the following quotation from George Bernard Shaw. I'm not sure he actually said it, but he's allegedly said that. Most people look at the world as it is and ask, why? What we should do is look at the world as it could be and ask, why not? So let's move in the direction of the why not discussion instead of sitting every day on YouTube, commentators, etc., and talking about what Trump said last night. Excuse me, it's not going to create any better world to talk about what Trump said last night. But we could say something better than Trump. That would probably change the world.
For the private citizen, what's your appeal to this private citizen? What should
Never
he
trust
or
the
she
mainstream media. Never trust your newspaper. There were things you do in, public service broadcasting. Don't trust it. Use your internet. Read media from around the world. Study it yourself. You know, when I was young, there was only one media. There was a state radio and television. There was no internet. I could not read a Chinese or Indian or African or Venezuelan newspaper. I can sit down in my sofa or at my desk and I can get a view of the world if I'm willing to invest the time. I can get a very much more intelligent, broad, diverse and truthful image of the world and learn about the world in a way I cannot no longer at the mainstream media in the Western world. So I would say that's one thing. The other thing is organize, read books, have study circles about peace and conflict resolution. In 3 months, if you have a study circle, you will know and read 2 books, 2 good books about conflict resolution. You will know much more than the politicians who make decisions for you. They have no clue about peace and conflict resolution and reconciliation and the better world. So there's lots of things we can do.
With those words, I'm going to conclude this conversation. I know we also, you're into the Nobel Prize. You have criticism about the Nobel Prize. But I don't think we're going to go into that because then it's going to continue for a whole session more.
Okay, very good.
It's been very enlightening talking to you, and I know that you're busy speaking in different YouTube channels with a lot of interesting people. I'll take to my heart the positivism that we can solve the problem, that we need a new frame of mind in order to address the problems ahead, and that we need mutual respect for our differences that we have culturally. Did I get you right there?
Absolutely. And your viewers may ask, why does this guy, Jan Øberg, say different things from many others? Tell you what, I'm not dependent. The Transnational Foundation is built exclusively on people's small donations and has always been. We're not part of the government. We're not part of the corporate world. We can do free research and say what the hell we think is right. That is today an exception in the Western free world. So that's one reason that you hear different things, and peace, and that is the final thing perhaps one could think of. Why does peace not have any financing and any research institute? Even CIPRI in Stockholm is no longer doing peace. They say it themselves on top of their pages, the leading source on security. Not peace anymore. They said peace 10 years ago. Today they say security, and they deal with military affairs. Change the name because it's not a peace research institute anymore. Now, why is it that peace must live in the fringes, in the small holes in the wall and the wall of militarism? That's what your viewers might have to ask themselves. And why does the UN live there too?
Thank you very much, Jan Øberg. I think we're going to do like this, that we're going to put your contacts for your foundation into this video shoot.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And good luck with your work, and thank you very, very much for participating.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Again, you're an independent person, you're an independent mind, so that's why we can dialogue with each other so well.